In the dead of night, when shadows hide in complete silence, the heavy, trembling footsteps of a man echo through empty, lifeless alleys. No sound breaks the silence except for those footsteps. At this very moment, a merciless killer emerges from the darkness. Yang Xinhai, a man driven by a bloody and bitter thirst for revenge, hunting down innocent victims with ruthless precision. What sets him apart is not just his brutality, but an unimaginably terrifying method of killing, where the pleasure of others' pain is a twisted delight. You are now stepping into his nightmarish world, where every corner is filled with secrets and fear. Do you have the courage to hear this story? In the darkest corners of Henan province, in a village swallowed by poverty and despair, a child was born, one who would grow to become one of the most terrifying monsters in China's history. Yang Xinhai, the youngest of many siblings, entered the world with eyes as cold and empty as the void itself. The house he grew up in was nothing more than cracked mud walls, a roof that barely held against the wind, and an eerie silence that hung in the air like a curse. His parents, poor farmers, spent their days in the fields, while Yang remained in the shadows, consumed by his own silence. No one noticed him. No one cared. At school, the other children avoided him. He was strange, unsettling. Perhaps it was his eyes void of emotion, void of life. He never spoke, never played. He would simply sit in a corner, watching, waiting, and sometimes he disappeared. Days, weeks would pass, and then he would return, his clothes tattered, covered in dirt. No one knew where he had been. At night, the villagers swore they heard whispers coming from the nearby woods, a hushed, eerie murmur like the voice of a lost spirit. Some claimed they had seen Yang wandering in the shadows, his eyes glinting in the darkness like those of a starving predator. No one knew the horrors that festered within his mind. No one knew that the real nightmare had yet to begin. The night was a thick veil of darkness, draped over the earth like a mourning shroud. The wind slithered through the barren trees, whispering secrets to the shadows. A narrow dirt road, swallowed by fog, led to a small, secluded house on the outskirts of the village. Silence loomed heavy, the kind of silence that clings to the air before catastrophe strikes. Yang Xinhai had spent his life lurking in darkness, and tonight he would take his first step into madness. His body melted into the shadows, his eyes two empty voids consuming the night. He moved with eerie precision, his fingers tracing the cold metal of the hammer he carried. He reached the door. His heart wasn't pounding with excitement. It beat in a steady, trance-like rhythm, as if his body already knew what to do. Slowly, he turned the handle. The door groaned open. Inside, the house was drowning in darkness. Only the soft, rhythmic breathing of a sleeping family filled the air. Yang stepped forward, silent as a ghost. The hammer, heavy in his grip, gleamed under the faint silver of the moon. For a brief moment, he hesitated. The voices in his head, whispers from a place deep and unseen, stirred again. This is right. The world that ignored you must suffer. The hammer swung down. A sickening crack echoed in the room, followed by a splatter of blood, painting the walls in grotesque patterns. A sharp cry cut short, and then another and another. Yang moved methodically, his strikes precise, efficient like a butcher carving meat. When it was over, the house was drowned in deathly silence. The scent of fresh blood and terror lingered in the air. Yang let the hammer slip from his fingers, dipping his hand into the warmth of his victim's blood. He stared at it, fascinated. He had been reborn, and this was only the beginning. After the first kill, something inside Yang Xinhai had awakened, something that could never be silenced again. Like a predator who had tasted its first blood, a hunger had settled within him. But this was not an impulsive thrill. No, he was calculated, precise, and devoid of emotion. He walked the shadows, choosing his victims with a meticulous, almost ritualistic obsession. He traveled through the darkness, moving from town to town, leaving no trace behind. He was always silent, always invisible. His victims were the most vulnerable, the unsuspecting families asleep in their rural homes, the lone women walking dimly lit streets, the men who fell into deep slumber, unaware that death lurked just beyond their doors. A young woman lay asleep in her bed. Her husband had left for the city for work. Yang slipped through the window, his rusted hammer gripped firmly in his hand. The woman stirred, her eyes fluttering open to find a shadow looming over her. She didn't have time to scream. The hammer came down. Once, twice. Silence. Blood soaked into the white pillow beneath her. Yang didn't bother searching the house. He wanted nothing. No money, no valuables. He wanted only this moment. The final silence after the kill. The frozen second where life ceased to exist. To him, it was art. A canvas painted in crimson. A father, a mother, and a child all fast asleep. Yang entered as he always did, without a sound. Methodically, he raised the hammer and brought it down. Bones shattered, skin split. Life drained away in an instant. But this time, the child wasn't dead. A faint whimper escaped his lips as he saw the lifeless bodies of his parents beside him. Yang paused. For the first time, he did not use the hammer. Instead, he dropped it, reached out, and cradled the child's head in his hands. He stared into his terrified eyes, and slowly, with his bare hands, pressed his fingers into the small throat. The whimpers faded, silence returned. Yang's methods were clear. Silent entry in the dead of night, a hammer or blunt weapon to crush skulls, and vanishing without a trace. There was no frenzy, no apparent enjoyment. He did not laugh. He did not shake. He simply did his work as if bound by a duty only he understood. But he was never alone. There was always something with him, a voice, a whisper, a command echoing inside his skull. He knew this path would not end well, but what did it matter? He was no longer just a man. He was a shadow cast over China. And no one, no home, no family was safe. Yang Xinhai never married. Love, family, and human connections had no place in his world. He drifted from city to city like a shadow, nameless, homeless, purposeless, except for one thing: murder. He slept in dark alleys, hid in abandoned factories, and scavenged food from what others discarded. No one expected him. No one noticed his presence. He lived among people, yet he was never one of them. Had he ever thought about love? About having a family to hold him close? Perhaps in the distant past, before the hammer was in his hands, before the voices whispered in his mind. Yang Xinhai once had a girlfriend, but he lost her due to his criminal history. This breakup was a heavy blow for him, fueling a desire for revenge against society and those who had rejected him. The anger and pain from being abandoned gradually pushed him towards ruthless crimes. He no longer cared about rejoining society and decided he would never be a part of it again. He had chosen the shadows. And in the end, the shadows were the only thing that ever stayed with him. On the cold, foggy night of October 2002, darkness had spread across the isolated roads of rural China. No one knew that a shadow of madness was on the move, someone who could tear innocent lives apart without a moment's hesitation. On this horrifying night, Yang Xinhai struck again. He approached a remote house where a small family lived. The tall trees surrounding the house stood like silent sentinels, the only witnesses to what would soon unfold. Li, a 40-year-old man, and his 6-year-old daughter, Chen Ming, lay inside, unaware that their peaceful night would soon turn into a nightmare. Yang entered silently, unseen and unheard. Li and his daughter were sleeping, but the silence wouldn't last for long. The heavy blow of Yang's hammer struck Li's stomach. He woke up in shock, but before he could even react, another strike landed on his skull. His body crumpled to the floor, lifeless. The scream of the young girl shattered the quiet, but it was quickly swallowed by the shadows. Chen Ming, the innocent 6-year-old, scrambled in fear, trying to hide in the corner. But Yang was methodical, approaching her slowly. With another hammer, he smashed her face, crushing her tiny form, taking her life in an instant. At that moment, a pregnant woman who lived nearby came to visit Li and his daughter. Yang found her, too. The woman, still carrying the pain of pregnancy, had no time to defend herself. Yang's hammer struck her repeatedly, leaving her with grave head injuries. But despite the brutal blows, she managed to escape the house, running for her life. The memories of that horrifying night would remain forever etched in the mind of the woman who barely survived. She was left with deep, haunting wounds, both physical and psychological, that would never heal. After years of terror and madness, Yang Xinhai was finally caught. In 2003, Chinese authorities, after identifying a pattern in his crimes, launched a thorough investigation. Yang had an uncanny ability to operate quietly, and as a result, many of his murders went unsolved for a while. But eventually, the police realized that the murders in different regions of China shared similar traits. The use of a hammer and severe blows to the skull, a distinct method that couldn't possibly be random, led investigators to the conclusion that a serial killer was at work. With relentless efforts, authorities finally apprehended Yang Xinhai on November 3, 2003. He had been hiding in an abandoned house on the outskirts of a major city. His arrest came without resistance, and when handcuffs were placed on him, there was no emotion on his face. He appeared cold and indifferent, as if nothing mattered to him. His trial began in 2004, where Yang confessed to committing 66 murders and several rapes and assaults on women. The court quickly found him guilty, and he was sentenced to death. On February 14, 2004, Yang Xinhai was executed by hanging in Tianjin prison. His crimes and the fate of Yang Xinhai became a dark chapter in Chinese criminal history. The psychological scars of his brutal murders still linger in Chinese society. In Hunter Mind, you enter the dark and terrifying world of deranged minds and ruthless killers, where every crime tells a story of deep rage, bloody revenge, and endless pain. If you dare to hear these tales, subscribe to our channel and support us as we continue this chilling journey.